this is prepping you for the final. The final is you're going to submit 40 pages of your journal. And we're going to talk about what the journal is. Brad's going to show you examples of the journal. You'll have time to figure this out. The point is to start now. Don't think you can do the journal in just 2 nights before the final and cram and everything looks the same. It's terrible. Don't do that. And then you're going to submit 40 pages of the journal as a PDF, and 1 page, your favorite page out of all those, as a JPEG. And then on the last day of class, when we're back in the auditorium, we'll project all of your selects, your one image, and we'll get a page out of everybody's journal. You can see what everybody else is doing. That's about it. Any other professors have stuff?
I guess don't worry about, oh my gosh, how do I make that into a PDF yet? We will cover all of that as we get toward the end. So you just need to worry about doing the journaling now and the actual electronicing of it. Yeah, worry about that later.
You want to say, and journals, these are things that can overlap other classes. They're just like a journal is a good place to put your thoughts, your ideas, things you're influenced by. Collages you like making, maybe it's your own artwork, or maybe it's a grab of something that you thought, oh, this is really great the way this is framed, or something like that. So Brad will show you a bunch of those good examples. And
hello, that's loud. Hey, one question: are you guys doing that PH141 hashtag thing? Or
No.
Did that end like years ago? All right, then I won't mention it. Forget I said anything. Hi, I'm Brad Harris. You would have seen me before, except I skipped the orientation session because I had to shoot that day. So for those of you who aren't in my photo one class, it's nice to meet you. Years ago when we kind of wrote this class, the inspiration was that we spent a lot of time in our classes teaching students how to make photographs, but there wasn't really a place where we talked about where to find inspiration, kind of where to find ideas and how to drive a creative process. And that's kind of the core of this class of PH141, to really focus on the creative process and where ideas come from. And so this is a lecture I've been doing most years since the class started, about kind of ways that you can drive your own creativity. That there are strategies that other artists have used to kind of, help them generate ideas. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna skip over this because, all right. So, yeah, Chuck Close just died. I don't know if any of you were aware of who Chuck Close was? No? Chuck Close is a painter, and he had this great quote, inspiration for amateurs, the rest of us show up and get to work. The idea being that, like, good artists don't sit around waiting to be struck by a brilliant idea. They just work all the time. And their ideas come from the fact that they're always working. And one idea leads to another idea, leads to another idea. And that kind of nonstop work is what keeps ideas flowing. Waiting for inspiration to strike never really works particularly well. And let me see if this will actually work. Do you guys know who Ira Glass is? Okay, so Ira Glass is a radio host. He has a show on NPR called This American Life. It's been around for a really long time. And he kind of created this whole new format for radio shows that's kind of been copied a lot since then. And he has this great quote about, oops, shoot, you know what? Huh. See if they'll let me, oh, here we go. Let's see if this works. All right. Now we're good. Oh, okay. Let's see. is that wireless? All right, never mind. We don't actually have a good internet signal. I'll just continue. Well, I'll put this link in, I'll send this link to the teachers of the class and they can send it around. I can kind of, sorry, let me get back to where we're, okay. It's a great class, a quote from our class that basically talks about, in any artistic endeavor, like the thing that usually makes you interested in doing it, whether it's, you know, making a radio show or making photography or writing, is that you have good taste. Like, the thing that gets you excited about that medium is the fact that you kind of recognize what's good and what's not. And the problem is that when you start out, you're not very good. And so he talks about how getting good at something means making a lot of bad stuff and learning the crafting out of the way before you make good stuff, and to not get discouraged by the fact that you're well aware that what you're making isn't that great, and to just keep making things, and eventually you'll kind of get through that process of learning the medium and make stuff that you can be really proud of. Where do you get inspiration? You moved to New York City, that's a good start. You know, every artist I know is extremely aware of what the other artists are doing, what their peers are doing. And, you know, I think that you have to kind of curate your own, life. Like, you need to make sure that you're exposing yourself to stuff that inspires you, that makes you want to make more work. You know, here in New York City, you have access to some of the best museums in the world, some of the best galleries in the world. And I'll talk about them more in a bit. Right here at FIT, hopefully, I don't know if you get a tour of FIT facilities in the library, but FIT is this amazing resource of every single issue of Vogue and Harper's in the library. They look really boring. It's just a bookshelf with a lot of like generic leather-bound books. But I forget what the date range is. I think both start in like the 1930s. And FIT has every single issue going all the way through to the present day. And I know photographers who have spent a tremendous amount of money to have that collection themselves. Because fashion photographers in particular always need new ideas. They always need new inspiration. And a great resource is to be able to see what's been done over the past century of fashion photography, and to basically kind of steal and recycle ideas like this. So if you haven't checked out these shelves of Vogue and Harper's, I highly recommend it. It's on the bottom floor of the library in the periodical section against the wall. Looks really boring from the outside, but there's amazing content in those bound magazines. In New York City, I mean, how many of you have been to the Met? Yeah, that's amazing. How much does it cost? Yeah, it's free. It's pay what you want. It's a short, 30-minute train ride from MIT. MoMA. How much is MoMA for FIT students? It's also free. And it's also a short train ride from MIT. The MoMA PS1 is in Long Island City. It's a little bit further away. It has more contemporary art, also free for FIT students. Yeah, on the PS1. Actually, is the book fair happening this year? Is it virtual?
I think it's virtual.
Yeah. MoMA hosts a really amazing book fair every year that probably hasn't run since the pandemic, and it's never been this year, where they basically give over most of their space to people selling books and zines and kind of interesting prints and things. We always highly recommend students go to that. It's not happening this year, but hopefully it'll start up again maybe next year because it's quite popular. Chelsea galleries are amazing. Most of the galleries that show interesting photography are in Chelsea in a relatively small area and a very short walk from campus. Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, in one of those galleries, have you promoted your show? Yes.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
It's actually on Fifth Avenue, 745 Fifth Avenue.
Oh, it's not in Chelsea?
No.
Oh, then never mind.
I know.
I'm kidding.
here, it's got a really good closing reception. It's one where you guys all do chill and talk. Check it out.
Yes. Lots of great shows are there. Yeah. Oh, wait. I have a list of there. Sorry, I didn't list anyone out because it's not Chelsea. But it's also, it's just as good. But yeah, all of these resources are free. There's kind of like no good excuse to not take advantage of them. When I was in photo school, I went to RIT in Rochester, and it was a good experience because there was nothing else to do, so you really focused on photography. But you had to drive all the way to Buffalo to see art, to see anything significant. It was like an hour and a half drive on the New York Thruway. I would have killed to have the resources available that you have here. So yeah, you're in school in New York City. The museums and galleries are one of the best resources you can take advantage of. And I guarantee if you're not, if you ever leave here, you'll miss having that stuff easily available. I also find films to be an amazing kind of resource for photographers. I mean, the reality now is that, you all have a digital camera that's capable of shooting amazing video footage, and there's a chance that by the time you finish here, you'll be more interested in making films than making still photographs anyway. But even for those of us who are doing still photography, the kind of films are amazing visual reference, and photographers have been borrowing them from them for as long as films have existed. Alfred Hitchcock is like a huge inspiration for a lot of photographers. This is a still from The Birds, one of Alfred Hitchcock's films. Alex Prager did a series, borrowing the imagery directly from stills from The Birds. Here are a few images from that series. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is that Spielberg? Yeah. Directed by Steven Spielberg. Have any of you ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind? I see one hand. Use some really interesting visuals. These are stills from the film. It's about aliens coming to Earth. It's actually a bit more complicated than that, but yeah. And Gregory Crewdson, probably the series that he kind of is still best known for. The imagery in the stills drew directly from the imagery in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. These lights coming from out of the frame with kind of surreal things happening in the foreground. Even documentaries have served as kind of references for photographers. Have any of you ever seen Grey Gardens? No one. That's amazing.
That's not true. I saw a light hand.
Oh, is there one hand up there for Grey Gardens? So I highly recommend watching Grey Gardens. It's a documentary by the Maisel brothers about Edith, who being the older daughter Edie, who were like somehow related to Jackie Kennedy, and were living together in like a crumbling down mansion in the Hamptons. And it was kind of like, it's an amazing documentary, really popular at the time. They remade a dramatic version of it on HBO, starring Drew Barrymore and Jessica Lange. Have any ever watched Documentary Now? There's a fantastic satire of Grey Gardens called Sandy Passage, starring Fred Armisen and Bill Hader, that I highly recommend, but you should really watch the original first. And Stephen Meisel has kind of stolen imagery from it to use for stories in remote Italia. There's stills from, or I guess it is still, but he kind of used images shot to sort of look like stills from the film, directly borrowing imagery from Grey Gardens. Yeah, so, you have to curate your own collection of places to steal ideas and steal inspiration. But then the other, kind of fantastic tool for kind of generating ideas is some sort of journal, sketchbook, diary. which I guess you've been assigned already. Yes, you can work this class. And I have some examples of photographers and artists who have used kind of journals and sketchbooks in a really interesting way. Chris Buck, really interesting photographer in the area, friend of Tim Soder's. At a time did a lot of celebrity photography, and he talks about keeping a list of ideas that he wants to do, just in his notebook. And basically, when he was at a shoot and ran out of like the ideas that the client wanted, would just kind of pick one from the list. And this is one of the pictures that resulted from that list of ideas. He was photographing William Shatner, and he got to the end of the images the client wanted, and he said that he looked at his list and said to Shatner, how about getting out of the pool, soaking wet? And William Shatner said, like, absolutely not, it's a terrible idea. And so he said, okay, what about getting handcuffed? And he said, okay, that's fine. And so it resulted in this photograph. I have another good one here, but it's internet link. We don't have internet here, so we'll skip that. I'll include it with the links that I send to your teachers, and hopefully they'll put it in an email that will go up to the class later on. Frida Kahlo, Mexican painter, married to Diego Rivera, kept some pretty amazing sketchbooks. How many of you are familiar with Frida Kahlo? Is it because I showed her work in class? But yeah, they're kind of like really beautiful objects, outside of whatever she was using it for, to record ideas and to generate new ideas. And I mean, some of them I'm going to show you are people who are like tremendous, talented painters and can draw quite well. I mean, I spent a lot of time drawing in my journal, and I kind of like, my drawing skills topped out at like the 12-year-old level. I don't think you have to be able to draw well for a journal to be helpful. It's all about just working things out visually. And even if your drawings are not particularly good, you're still kind of working out the way, you're working out ideas visually, and it's still helpful. I just, try not to show them to anyone. This is more from Frida's journals. Do you know who Guillermo Del Toro is? Yeah. He's a director. He directed a list of what he... She completely forgot that I have notes. I should look at these more often. I'm getting there. Yeah, so Devil's Backbone. Have you seen Devil's Backbone? Excellent movie in Spanish. Still worth watching. Hellboy 1 and 2, Pan's Labyrinth, and Shape of Water. Those are all excellent movies. He also directed Pacific Rim and Blade 2. Not excellent movies. So don't just blindly watch everything he's ever done. But he's a great director, and he does, if you've seen particularly Pan's Labyrinth, he uses some really, really interesting visuals. And at some point he published like photos of his diaries or his journals, which are, it's actually kind of painful because no one's journal should look this perfect. It's like well laid out and illustrated. It's kind of insane. But they're pretty amazing, and you can see, character design ideas that he's done. This might actually be a really early drawing from Shape of Water character. But yeah, Guillermo Del Toro, film director, extensive journalist. And then finally, Peter Beard. Peter Beard also died pretty recently. Peter Beard is a photographer he was kind of probably best known in the 60s and 70s. Probably the thing he's best known for is a book called, like a Pirelli calendar he did. But he had a book called The End of Game. He lived in Africa part of the time, and the book was about elephants being poached. And so he made these aerial photographs of the remains of dead elephants. They're really incredible because you can see like the trails and the animals that came to eat the bodies. Kind of these really stunning, beautiful images. You know, kind of about like you know, preserving the wildlife in Africa that was getting killed by poachers. But he's also well known for the journals that he kept, and he would keep these journals that had photos glued in them, and then were drawn on, and then had, you know, pieces of snakeskin. He would smear blood on them, kind of paint on the photographs. And they're not just journals, but kind of really amazing objects. For a little while when I moved into the city, there was a gallery just kind of dedicated to his work in Soho, and they had his journals on display. Let me see if I have any images of the journals, because as objects themselves, they're incredible. It's kind of like hard to read what's in this photograph. You can see Peter Beard in the upper right-hand corner, but often the journals, these sketchbooks, had so much stuff pasted into them and painted on them that they wouldn't close anymore. Like they were kind of permanently open, and had just become these giant, like, you know, things encrusted with blood and paint and, you know, various bodily fluids. And so they became interesting objects in themselves outside of like the artwork that was inside of them. And, you know, I think for a lot of people were maybe some of the most interesting work he made. If you look at them closely, you know, it'll have photographs and paintings and drawings, but also like receipts from dinner and just like weird bits of ephemera from his life, you know, plane tickets, things like that, newspaper articles. And he clearly made them compulsively. I mean, when you see the stacks of journals, like, he would finish one and immediately start on a new one. Man, I have a lot of photos of Peter Beard sitting here. Jim, I'm going to cut these out next time. Oh, please quickly. Can I just choose not to edit this at all? Oh my God.
Weren't you selling them that year?
Okay, here we go. Dan Eldon is a photographer who died really young. And he was very influenced by Peter Beard and was lived in Africa, was traveling through Africa, and ended up publishing this book. It was really popular with students in like 2002 or something. I haven't heard his name since then, but this is kind of like an updated version of what Peter Beard was doing. He made a very similar kind of body of work. And when he died, he was like 21 or 22. His parents published his journal. And Walter Ives. Does anyone know who Walter Ives is? He's a photographer. He was known as a sports photographer. I guess he is known as a sports photographer. Shot a lot for Sports Illustrated. Through probably, you know, the second half of the 20th century. You see a lot of faces you recognize in here. Doing with advertising, Sports Illustrated associated issues, stuff like that. But he published a book of his journals that were, you know, a lot of Polaroids, because he was in the area where you shot a lot of Polaroids on commercial photo shoots, and frames from contact sheets. as just kind of document for himself to remember what he'd done. And he published a book of his journals, and one of the interesting things about it is that it's often like pages from like a day planner. And so in addition to photographs, he'll have like notes about what he's doing that day, what his plans are, like what's on his schedule, as well as, headlines of newspapers and things like that. And that, I think there's some value in honestly just keeping track of what it is you've done. Which is also, I think, a kind of, it can be like a source of inspiration and kind of keep you on track. Just so you know, where you're coming from and where you're going. Because it's there are times when you're busy, you're making a lot of work, and it's nice to have, one place that you put the images that record to you for whatever reason. Another link that I put in. Jonathan Saunders is a guy I know from school who's also an obsessive journaler. Actually, do you know if he's still journaling?
I think so.
Or that kind of ended, and then in this case, he was keeping these extensive journals, which he posted like comprehensively on his website. I think once he got a blog, that took over for the journal, and he hasn't been journaling anymore. But we'll send you this link also. Yeah. So what else is there? This will probably be the last thing I talk about. There is, and I forgot to bring my copy. There's a thing called Oblique Strategies. And Oblique Strategies is a set of cards made by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. Brian Eno is a musician who started out in Roxy Music. I think that's Brian Eno on the left. Tim, you confirm? Here, that's Brian Eno. He's also really well known for recording music for airports, which was the what is music for airports? Yeah, minimalist. Kind of like possibly inventing minimalist music, or at least the orthophonic ones. And he became oh, that's funny. It's playing for airports. And he became a producer and produced a bunch of great albums kind of through the 70s and 80s, like Talking Heads, David Bowie, Devo, Slow Dive, U2, and then a bunch of terrible U2 albums. He also came up with the Windows 95 sound, like the startup sound for Windows 95. Anyway, he spent a lot of time doing production, and he started to think about the fact that like they're always making these decisions in the studio, and you're constantly confronted with the studio to make a decision. And he made this deck of cards, the idea being that when you have to make a decision, if you can't decide what to do, you can just pull a card from the stack and follow what the card tells you to do. And so you can read that. These cards evolve from separate observations of the principles underlying what we were doing. Sometimes they're recognized in retrospect, intellect catching up with intuition. Sometimes they're identified as they're happening. Sometimes they're formulated. They can be used as a pack, a set of possibilities being continuously reviewed in the mind, or by drawing a single card from the shuffled pack when a dilemma occurs in a working situation. In this case, the card is trusted, even if its appropriateness is quite unclear. They are not final, as new ideas will present themselves, and others will become self-evident. So the idea is that you come to a partner to make a decision, and you draw a card, and you try and figure out how that card applies to the situation. And so they have kind of like these cryptic messages on them, like try faking it, think inside the work, outside the work, voice nagging suspicions, in total darkness or in a very large room very quietly, what wouldn't you do? use an old idea, which I like a lot. Yeah, and so, yeah, it was just a way of like breaking you out of a state of indecision, you know, of like motivating you to find a direction to go. I'll be honest, I've owned these cards for a while. I don't think I've ever actually used them. I keep meaning to actually like bring them onto a shoot and like stopping, looking at a card and like letting it guide me, but I've never done it, but I still got to enjoy some cards. The last thing I'm going to talk about, this is kind of like where ideas come from, is another photographer and friend of Tim. Are you going to talk about it?
Oh, you said friend of Tim, that makes me look weird.
I know it is. But he is a good friend of Tim's. Are you going to talk about Arthur?
Yeah, so actually we talk about it next class.
Oh, interesting. So I'll just give like a very interesting. So when you talk about where ideas come from, Arthur Tress did this book in what year did he do this?
In the 70s.
In the 70s, called Dream Collector, where he went around and asked people what their dreams were and then illustrated them. And the entire book are illustrations of people's dreams. And you know, it's kind of like the weird, surreal imagery, sometimes a little nightmarish that comes through in dreams. This was the album cover of like a really popular 90s album that was so popular I can't even remember who the name was anymore. But this was kind of every year from, I don't know, like 1993 to 1995. But that's the Dream Collector, and now I just ruined Tim's slide presentation for next week. I would love to stay to talk more, but I'm actually in class right now, and I have to go back to make sure that they haven't like burned the classroom down. Trying to shoot with multiple speedlights.
That was great. I have one last thing to add, and we're all done. Thank you, Brad. That was nice. So think about these things for your journal. It doesn't have to be exactly like any of these things. The one thing I want to say, which I think is really, really helpful, when I've made a lot of journals in the past, or just books, you can get really inexpensive LaserJet prints at like Staples or maybe Print FX upstairs here in the buildings. And I choose the size that's 11 by 17 inches. I take some of the photos I want, I size them up there and get as many as I can on a page where they're not super small. I like the size. You can get a lot of photos in one 11 by 17 laser printout. Cut it out, get a cheap glue stick, glue it on the back, slap it in the book, arrange it, do some writing, don't do some writing. That's a cheap way to work on your journal. So consider that or come up with your own ideas. Are there any questions for any of the professors before you go?
If you're in my section, I think the sign-up sheet, so on your way out.
You too? So all the sign-up sheets are there. Oh, sorry. All the sign-up sheets are there on your way out, and we will see you next week. Thank you.